Okay, so this is basically the formula. I'll come back to this. Just if I were teaching you an algebra, this is what I will do. This entire fraction, okay, this entire fraction times d is equal to p naught, right? So in order to find d, all I have to do is to divide both sides of the equation by this big fraction. Now, how do you divide a fraction? How do you divide a p naught by a fraction? Okay. Dividing by a fraction means you multiply by the reciprocal, right? Do you remember this? Just invert and multiply. Don't ask me why, just invert and multiply. Okay, so you invert, you switch the top and bottom, and you multiply by P naught. So then the one side will be P naught times what used to be in the bottom, that's this. And then the new denominator will be exactly what you had on the top of the fraction, right? So you invert and you multiply by P naught and you will get your answer. So this is the formula to find D. So this is the way to directly calculate the amount of monthly payments, okay, derived from the first formula. All right, so again, you do not memorize, you don't have to memorize this. Let me go ahead and write this down. No need to memorize this. So why am I presenting this? Well, because you will need this for your homework. Need this for your homework. I will not have you do this kind of a calculation on your exam because this is fairly complicated. It makes sense to do this for your homework. A little struggle is a great thing. But on your test, I will not be asking you, or I will not be evaluating you on how well you can punch numbers into your calculator, okay? I will be asking you for more conceptual question. All right, so here's a practical example, all right? I'm going to tell you ways to save thousands of dollars. Suppose you are buying a house valued at the median home price in Santa Clarita. You know what that is? What's a sort of an average home price? If you take all the houses for sale or all the houses, the values in Santa Clarita, what's the value right in the middle of that list? And the answer is about 550,000. Let's just say $546,600. Suppose you can pay, that's a lot of money. You have saved up tons of money. Suppose you are ready to pay $46,600 as a down payment. Okay, so this is the house you want to buy. You already have this amount of money. That means you need to buy what? You need to borrow the difference between these, which is $500,000. Imagine that you are borrowing, or you are taking out a loan worth $500,000, okay? For each of the following scenarios, you have 30 years at 3.6%, 30 years at 4.0%. Wow, that's really close, right? I mean, what's the difference between these two? The answer is only 0.4% difference. And hopefully you will see a huge difference, because that's the point I'm trying to make, that the percentage point actually does make a huge difference. And then how about 15 years at 3.6% monthly? Okay, and then for each of these, I want you to calculate the monthly payment amount, and then the total amounts you pay over the term of the mortgage, and then the interest paid over the mortgage, all right? This is a very important question. It could possibly change your life. Watch, seriously, okay? I'm not exaggerating. I wish somebody would have told me this when I was young and stupid, or young and uneducated. This is very practical, right? So you have 30 years, and by the way, let's go ahead and write down R here is 0.036, right? 3.6%. N is 30. Okay. By the way, K is always 12 because it's always monthly payment. All right. So you can do R over K. This is the rate per month. That's 0.036 divided by 12. That's 0.003. N times K is 12 times 30. That's 360. Can you imagine? This is the number of payments you'll be making to buy this house. 360 payments. That's it, okay? Only 360 payments, and then the house will be yours eventually, maybe, okay? So the way you calculate this, just try to plug in the formula. P naught, by the way, is this. This is the amount of loan that you are borrowing, right? Because this is how much you have to buy. This is how much your house is, and this is how much you can afford to pay today as a down payment. The rest of the money, the balance is 500,000. So you have 500,000 on the top times, remember R divided by K, which is 0.003. You have a very large number multiplied by a very small number. The denominator is 1 minus 1 plus 0.003 raised to the negative 360th power. Okay, this is a fairly complicated calculation. The top is easy. Top is 1500. The bottom is not so easy. I will show you in a minute how you calculate this. But this is, if you do the denominator, it turns out to be 0.659855. The answer is 227323. This is the amount that you would have to pay every single month, only for 360 months, okay? And of course, the question is, can you afford it, okay? Here's the rest of this, right? So the total payment, how much are you going to pay for this house eventually, right? The way you do this is you take this amount and multiply this by 360, okay? Now, why would you do that? Why would you multiply this by 360? Well, that's because you're making 360 payments of this amount each, okay? And it turns out the total payments will be it'll be, if you just multiply by 360, you have 818,362.80. That's $818,362.80. Now remember, P naught is 500,000, right? So in order to borrow $500,000, you are going to be making over the next, over the course of the next 30 years, a payment whose total will be, the payments whose total will be 818,000. The difference is $318,362.80. Now, what is that? The difference between how much you paid and how much you borrow. This is your total interest. In other words, this is a token of your appreciation to the banker or the mortgage house. Thank you for allowing me to buy this house today, as opposed to when I can really afford it, I'm going to give you $318,000 extra dollars, even though I am borrowing only 500,000. Now, this sounds ridiculously high, but it is the reality, okay? This is how much you are going to this is how much you are going to pay extra in order to buy the house today. And that's based on your monthly mortgage payment of $2,273.23. Okay, let's look at this. Make sure you know how to calculate this. Okay, so the top of the, just making sure you know how to do the calculation we just did. 500,000, this is 500,000, okay? You multiply this by 0.003. So this will give you the top, the numerator, that's 1,500. So that's an easy part, okay? So let's keep this, maybe you can write this number down, and then I'm gonna set this back to 0. Okay, the other thing I need to find out is 1 minus, 1.003 to the negative 360th. I can do that in one sequence of key entries. Okay, so watch what happens. I'm going to do 1 minus. Okay, so far I have 1 minus, and then I'm going to go ahead and put 1.003 raised to 360 plus or minus. Okay, now watch what happens here. On the top right corner, you see what I'm doing. It's 1 minus 1.003 raised to the negative 360th power. Your scientific calculator is smart enough to know the right order of operations. When you enter this, it's not going to do 1 minus 1.003 first and raise it to the 360th power or negative 360. What it is going to do is to do 1.003 and raise it to the negative 360th power first, and then subtract that from 1, which is exactly what you want. So all I have to do now is to enter this, okay? Put the equal sign. There you go, okay? That's the denominator. So now you just have to divide 1500 by this number. Okay, so you can write these digits down, divide 1500 by this number, or I'm just going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide this by 1500. And of course, I don't get the right answer because I am doing the division backwards. But that's okay, because if I click on this one, that's the reciprocal. This will give me exactly the opposite of what I just did, okay? And so if I enter this, this will give me the correct answer, $2,273.23. Now, again, every calculator is slightly different. So you need to learn how your calculator works, okay? And so you can look at the manual, or you can show me your calculator on Zoom if you want to, and I will help you enter the right keys for correct operations, okay? So you got the answer. This is the amount of monthly payments. All right, you can do the similar calculation. This time R is 0.04. Okay, now this is going to be a little tricky because if you divide this by this, okay, it's going to be 0.04. That's 4% divided by 12. Okay, and it's not a very nice number. Okay, what happens when you have not a nice number like this? You may want to keep it this way. Or you can go ahead and write 0.00333, but the problem is it's just repeating decimal, all right? So D is 500,000 times this number, okay, 0.3. I'm just going to go ahead and write this, okay? And if you can just manage to multiply this 500,000 times 0.04 and divide it by 12, you will be able to find this number here, correct number. Right, and then on the bottom is this, right, 360. Okay, if you do this calculation, and I'm not going to show you exactly the value here, I mean the step-by-step operations on the calculator, but if you do this in a similar way, you will end up with $2,387.08. Now, this is sort of similar to the amount I had before, right? I mean, the difference is maybe $100. Big deal. Or is it a big deal? Okay, let's start thinking about this. This is how much you are paying per month. Okay, now the thing is, this is what happens. The amount of the kind of mortgage you qualify for is largely depending on how trustworthy people think you are. Okay, and that is usually determined by what is called the credit worthiness, or the credit index number. Okay, how good is your credit? How good is your credit number? People may ask you, okay? And if your number is really good, like over 800, you may qualify for a lower rate interest, like 3.6%. And if it's not, maybe you missed some payments in the past or something. And if you're not as credit worthy, or if they think you are not as credit worthy as somebody else, this is the amount this is a percentage they may charge you. Okay, and the difference is going to be like $100 a month. Okay, but let's see what happens when you try to calculate the total payments and all that. If you multiply this by 360, okay, you will get 589,348.80. All I'm doing is multiplying this number by 360 payments. Remember, your the amount of your loan was 500,000. Okay, so the difference is $348.80. Okay, so now compare the difference. This is how much you paid in total interest under the 3.6% interest rate. This is how much you paid in total interest under the 4% interest rate. The difference is staggering, right? I mean, you're talking like a $40,000 difference. Where did the difference come from? Okay, the difference of $40,000 in this entire mortgage, term, comes from a very slight difference in the interest rate, 3.6% as opposed to 4.0%. In other words, if you have a good credit score, okay, you could be saving $40,000, and that's what I was telling you, at the beginning of this class. You paid how much for this? You paid like $150 to take this class this semester. I am telling you how to save $40,000, $50,000 in a year. I mean, not in a year, in your lifetime, okay? And maybe even more if you buy more expensive homes or if you have higher interest rates, okay? So this is a great investment that you are taking this class. Okay, one more thing, 15 years. Oh, what is that? Okay, sometimes you may, if you are able to afford paying a little higher, higher monthly payment, you may even think about a shorter term, like 15 years. By the way, home mortgages are often either 15 or 30 years. There are more variations these days, but typically all mortgages are either 15 years or 30 years. At this good rate of 3.6%, okay? Here, what you can do is, now remember, in this case, R is 0.036, and like the first case, R over K is 0.003. So you can calculate this like before. This is going to be 0.003 divided by minus 1 plus 0.003 raised to the next, oh, that's the difference, right? Because now it's 15. What's n is 15, so n times k is not 360. Remember, k is 12. Okay, so this is going to be 180. That's exactly half, because 15 years is half of 30 years. Instead of making 360 payments, you are making 180 payments. That's it. Okay, after 15 years, if you pay everything in full, the house will be yours. Okay, and so if you do this calculation, you will see that this money is going to be significantly higher, $3,599.02. Why is it so much more? We got the same interest rate. Well, that's because you are going to try to pay off in only 15 years as opposed to 30 years, okay, per month. All right, so what's the total payments? Your total payments will be this amount. Now, of course, that's a lot of money, right? And you have to make sure that you can actually pay close to $3,600 a month just on your house for the next, 15 years. Because if you can't afford that, then you go into default and you will mess up your credit and you'll have all kinds of negative consequences. But if you can do this and you pay this 180 times, guess what? You will be paying only $647,823.60. Remember your P? 500,000. Okay, so what's the difference? Sorry, it's kind of messy here. The difference is your, interest, the total interest you end up paying, that's 147,823.60. Now compare this interest, the total interest with this amount and this amount, okay? There's a huge difference, right? If you can afford to pay off your house with a 15-year mortgage, you should do so, because the difference you end up paying throughout the term of your mortgage will be what? I mean, compared to this and this, we're talking like close to over $200,000 in difference, right? So here is a way to save $200,000 in your life when you buy a house, okay? Try to go for a shorter term if possible. Of course, there are all kinds of other implications like, tax deductions and so on. You may want to talk to some specialists because life is really complicated involving finance. But just keep this in mind. There are ways to save tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the kind of mortgage and the kind of interest rate that you can get, all right? So there is one of the most important lessons in your life, I think. Okay, let's say a little smaller term, now maybe more realistic for a college student. This time you're not buying a car, you're not buying a house, you're just buying some nice speaker system. You saw a speaker system for $300. Great. Well, you can't afford it. Okay, you're going to college. You have to buy books and you have to, whatever. You can't afford it. But then the store clerk, a very nice person, comes to you and says, "Oh, you can't. Of course, you can afford this. This is yours. I mean, you deserve this, right? Of course, you give yourself a little break. You can buy this." You can buy this on credit. We have a store credit card. You can start an account and open an account, and all you have to pay is $11.30 every month. And you say, well, that's not bad. Yeah, I can afford, $11.30 every month. I mean, that's like 2 lattes, right? Okay, so then you do this for 3 years, and it's an APR of 21%. And by the way, they have to, the borrower or the lender has to reveal this, okay? This is a federal law called the Truth in Lending Act. And so they have to reveal this. Usually it's written in very fine print, just like here, okay? Somewhere in the back of your agreement. This sounds good. So you decide to buy this, okay? Now, this is a very good question. This is the kind of question I'll be asking you on your exam. Now, see, in order for you to calculate this amount, you have to use that formula, right? But if I give you this amount, that's a monthly payment, then you don't need that complicated formula at the top of the page. So that's why it's a very appropriate question for an exam. Okay, so you pay $11.30 every month. Okay, for this is times 12, that's 1 year. Then times 3, that's 3 years, right? So this turns out to be $406.80. This is your total payments. Get that? This is how much you are actually paying. How much is your speaker? Basically the amount. So you are not making any down payment. You're buying this for $300. Or you're not buying it for $300. You could be buying this for $300 today. You decide that you could not afford it, and somebody's convincing you can indeed afford this because you can make a payment of $11.30 every month for the next 3 years. The difference of $160.80, this is your total interest payment. Okay, so calculate the interest you are paying, and the answer is $160.80. Okay, now, and then, of course, what you want to do is reflect on this. Okay, is it worth it, right? Is it worth paying over $160 more to buy this $300 speaker system? And you need to answer that question. Sorry to spoil your life, but this is how, wisely you want to live. All right, overspending can happen at the government level as well. Now, so far we have been talking about personal finance, right? But if this happens at big scale, like for a country, or even for the state or county or whatever, okay, guess what? We, the taxpayers, end up paying the interest. So the 2 key words, and this is in 3.4, section 3.4, I should have told you that this entire lesson is actually in section 3.2, and only the second half, because 3.2 has both the savings, the annuities, and the borrowing, which is mortgages and loans. So this is part 2, or the second half of section 2 in chapter 3, except for this last part about the national debts and so on. Now, there is a difference between the word debt and deficits. For each year, let's say for any given academic year or fiscal year or calendar year, the surplus is the government revenue. Revenues are pretty much taxes, okay? Corporate taxes, sales taxes, property taxes from individuals, all those taxes. Some of the other fees you pay, like parking fees, I guess that counts as government revenues, minus the government spending. Government does spend money, right? And so the difference, now this is just like the personal finance. This is like how much you earn or how much you get paid minus how much you spend. If this number is positive, it's called a surplus. If this number is negative, guess what? It's called the amount of deficit. Okay, so the deficit happens for a period, like a year or a month or a decade or something. Okay. The word deficit is different from the word debt. This is the debt. So let's say 1 year your deficit is like $1 million. Next year your deficit is $2 million. Okay, now in total you have $3 million. So that is the accumulated amount. That's called the debt. Total, or the sum of deficits accumulated over many periods or over multiple years or something. Okay, so that's the word debt. So there's a difference between the word debt and deficits. Again, the deficit often is referring to the negative surplus. It's basically how much you overspend compared to how much you've received. And so if it's for 1 year, it's called a deficit. But if it's more than that, or for a long period of time, then we call that a national debt. Okay, so here's a website you can go to see what the national debt is, the United States debt clock, and it's moving very, very quickly because our debts are blowing like I've never seen before. Okay, so I hope you have learned at least somehow, maybe in the future, some ideas of how to save hundreds of thousands of or tens of thousands of dollars when you take out a huge loan, such as buying a car or buying a home or something. All right, so keep this in mind. You don't have to memorize the complicated formulas, but given, so maybe I should highlight this. Given a question like this, if you are given an amount of monthly payments and how much you're borrowing, you should be able to calculate the total interest paid over the term, okay? All right, so lesson 9 is about borrowing, and so hopefully you've learned your lesson. And this actually concludes chapter 3. So next time we'll go into a new chapter, which is chapter 4, okay? So until then, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.